As we wrap up Cybersecurity Month, we have a guest who is a field CTO and who works in the area of cybersecurity. He has a unique position in that he gets to see what a large number of companies are doing. He's also incredibly articulate, and I hope that this conversation gets you reflecting, not just on Cybersecurity Month, but on some of the things you might want to be doing and thinking about in the coming year. Welcome to the Weekend Edition. I'm your host, Jim Love, and today my guest is Ivo Wiens. He's the field CTO for CDW Canada. Now, most of my listeners may not know what CDW is and what they do. It's one of a number of unique businesses that make up what we call the channel. So welcome, Ivo.
Great to be here. Thank you, Jim.
Can you tell us a little bit about what CDW does?
It's really interesting. And for us in the size of company, we're a very large company. I talk to people, we're Forbes list, we're above MasterCard. We're above companies that are common brands, yet our brand isn't really recognized. I know when I talk to my family, I really have to explain what this is. And I think the quickest way to think about it is if you wanted to buy 5,000 laptops, you wouldn't go to Best Buy. You wouldn't be able to get 5,000 from the Apple Store or from Best Buy. That's the DNA of CDW, really this company that is able to meet the requirements of business to business. When business wants to buy technology, CDW is a common name in that space. My world, obviously, the cybersecurity world. So we are part of an expansion and a change that's happening at CDW where we're becoming a solutions company. Obviously, we're able to sell technology all the way to secure access service technology, SASE technologies, and security implementations. But my world is specifically in the area of security. And what CDW does in cybersecurity is obviously we sell the products, but also what we can do is help organizations decide when to buy those products, when to implement those products, and how. So we have a professional services arm and a managed security services arm as well that helps organizations with all those security decisions. It's a great place for us to be because CDW is such a large company. We sell almost all security technology that's out there. So from my perspective, it allows me and my team to really give the right perspective when it comes to budget, the right perspective when it comes to what is the right technology to solve the problem, and what is the technology that's really going to help with protecting the organization. It's a really great company to be part of because we get to propose everything and solve our clients' problems. It's really exciting that way.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're not really tied to one brand. You deal with everything. There's that I wouldn't say middle person, the middleman to some extent, but not with a pejorative connotation. This is helping put solutions together from various locations. That's a tens of billions of dollars in Canada,
Yeah.
an industry.
Absolutely.
And it has grown the same way the IT industry's grown as IT became more about services. So did CDW. As a matter of fact, I think CDW, I'm old enough to think, what is it? Which used to stand for computer dealer something. I can't remember at one point.
I believe the word was discount, even though we don't like to.
Computer discount warehouse. Yes.
We
And
don't like
that's, yeah, no, but that's ancient. Now it's CDW. Everybody thinks of it as just
Yeah,
CDW.
it started in the garage, right? Our founder started the organization from his garage and grew beyond that, selling the first computer from one state to the other through acquisitions, through many different changes. We've really grown. Nice to be part of these actions because they were people, right? We acquired organizations because they bring this knowledge and this capability that the people brought. So it's a good company from that perspective and lots of good values in our organization that we get to carry. And then you talk about all this technology and being, I think agnostic is the word that people like to throw around. We actually prefer the word independent because everybody on my team has tons of security experience, definitely have opinions when it comes to cybersecurity. And we want to make sure that those opinions come through in what we're talking about. When you're buying something, you want to be aware of the budget. You want to be aware of how it works. And you just don't want to push a single thing. You want to have an opinion. You want somebody who has an opinion, and that my team reflects that. Our whole security team reflects that really well.
Security people with an opinion. I'm shocked.
That's good.
Acting as an advisor, as well as a product company, as well as a services company. CDW also invests in the industry. And this is something I've known about because I used to work with CDW on research that we did as well. And you have KJ Burke's podcast. We've talked about that on my show, and I've been on with KJ. He's a good friend, and he does his piece of education. But you also do a lot of research and outreach.
KJ, who runs our podcast, co-worker, but I like to believe he's also my friend as well, Jim.
And using a very reputable research firm, IDC, and cover issues specifically with data from Canadian companies. And that's good. Our audience for the podcast is North American. CDWs also has that reach, but it's nice every once in a while to get that Canadian perspective. And I think even for our US listeners, they'll find that some of this is very useful. Can we talk about last year's research and what the key points were?
Sure. The research was conducted in December of last year. We've been doing this survey now for 9, almost 10 years. This year was 700 respondents, Canadian respondents. We like the idea of doing the Canadian perspective. There's nuances to the Canadian market. I think it's very common to take a big international number or a big American number and divide it by 10 and say, this is how the Canadian world is happening. But I think, and I know our survey takes a different nuance. One of the key findings that we had this year, and we actually got to verify that, we had a CISO summit a couple of weeks ago. We actually got to verify some of those areas by talking to the CISOs, 20 Canadian CISOs that came to our summit. One of the key areas was the growth in sophistication of attacks. I think in the past, there was a lot of broad attacks, and there was a really wide net that adversaries were casting. What we've seen in terms of the data this year is it really speaks to an investment in sophistication rather than a wide attack net. That, as it was custom in the past, attackers are investing in attacking smarter, not harder, and looking at ways to improve their own ROI. As we know, the majority of attacks, be it ransomware or even other attacks, they are very money driven. The majority of it is organized crime. The world of script kiddies and hackers that were doing this as sport has really dwarfed compared to how much organized crime is attacking Canadian.
And even when it is these so-called script kiddies or people doing it for thrills, they're, these people managed to make this into a franchise. They sell them the tools. So these are the foot soldiers of really a very successful business. I hate to say it, but in many cases, successful businesses.
Yeah. It's successful organized crime.
I think that's a better way to call it. Yeah.
The way
Thank
you want to really talk about it. I think that the investment from their side comes from nefarious areas. But what's interesting about it is the way they attack is they really have a problem they're trying to solve financially, and they are very creative with it. The same way organizations have been creative.
Yeah. And I wasn't trying to make it seem like they're a legitimate business, but it is this idea that we have to remember they think profit.
Yeah.
And as we defend against them, they're thinking about I'm making money. I'm doing this to get a return. And they're pretty darn good at it sometimes.
It's funded and organized in the same way as regular crime. They use old school tactics, right? If you think about it, they use intimidation, they use deception. The only thing is they have a new face to it and a new approach to it that's different than regular crime. But they also, they have that advantage of not being physically there. It's very similar to what we see in what we call regular crime, but just like a Silicon Valley startup, if you think of it that way, they have smart people who are working on developing the best possible tools to really separate you from your money or gift cards or whatever approach they take. The majority of what we see in the adversary side, as you can imagine, Jim, nation states are also investing in these areas as well. But the majority that we see is in the organized crime, in the organized types.
And even in the case of North Korea, I know they do hack and they do compromise things. They've actually made this into a business themselves, even as a nation state. So that's one big trend that seems to have continued from your study to the current day, and that is the increasing sophistication of attacks by these entities that are operating at a profit.
Right.
Unfortunately, they do. Anything else?
I think in an interesting area that it's not as sexy, not as interesting as attacks, but it's that organizations are starting to adopt frameworks. If you look at other professions, if you look at the world of accounting or the world of finance, there's always standards that you need to be for accounting. And you follow these accounting best practices and you follow this. If you're a bank, you're highly regulated and you need to follow these things. Cybersecurity is still playing catch up in that space. But a lot of what we're seeing in our cybersecurity profession now is people saying, I need to grab onto I need a framework to do what I need to do within my organization. I can't just go and listen to vendor X and buy their stuff and listen to vendor Y and buy their stuff. I need to have some kind of direction. So that's what we've seen over the years, many years of doing the study, is people are actually gravitating towards the concept of zero trust as a philosophy, but then attaching an actual framework to it, whether they need it or not, whether they're required to or not. It used to be that folks would do PCI because they needed to do credit card transactions. Now they're saying, hey, you know what? NIST has a good framework that we could attach ourselves to. Not only do we get to have a roadmap, but I can turn to the powers that be and say, hey, we're following these practices and it can make us safer. But on the flip side, it also makes us more competitive in the market, right? If you say you have a certain level of compliance from a security perspective and your competitor doesn't, you can use security as an enabler for business, which is a long way from the Department of No. And it actually security as an enabler for better business and organizations because everybody's.
Yeah, I think that's a really clear trend that we're seeing emerging is this idea of security being an enabler of business. We did a story on a survey today, and it didn't shock me, but it made me wake up. And people were talking about over half of the people in that survey would change banks if there was a major cybersecurity crisis at their bank.
Yeah.
I come from a world where nobody changed banks. So it was like you stayed with the bank that you banked with forever. And now cyber, even for those institutions, cybersecurity is becoming something people are looking at and saying, this is a big part of why I'm going to trust you and buy from you. I can see us needing to be part of that. A friend of mine once said, if you want to be successful in IT, go where the money is in business and talk like they do.
That's a good point. You make a good point about brand loyalty and how people shop now, right? You would historically you would go to your local Eaton's or Bay or Sears and buy regularly there, and that's the place you went. But you go to, I think availability is such a key area of IT now. You go to a website and that website is unavailable, or that website has a dodgy page in front of it. You're not buying from there. You'll move on. I think in terms of loyalty, businesses are feeling that as well, and they need to make sure that they have the cyber resilience to be available, but also the IT availability and that resilience from the overall IT perspective plays into a big part, right? We're seeing a lot more uh, because ransomware is such a prolific attack vector. We're seeing a lot of organizations say, hey, you know what? My backup is now part of my cyber resilience plan. What I do from a restore perspective is just as important what I do from a respond perspective. It's a broader conversation. We have a disaster recovery as a service capability. We have a managed service capability. These things need to be working together because organizations, it's not a matter of if, right? It's a matter of when and what will you do. One of the key areas we're seeing a lot of growth is the conversation about tabletop exercise.
Yeah.
Ta-
Tell me
yeah,
more about that.
tabletop exercises have become really popular in organizations. I have friends who are in the finance space, CFOs, and they come to me and say, Ivo, I know what you do for a living now because we went through a simulated attack and I know what cybersecurity is and I know what we need to do. In a tabletop exercise, we actually sit together with key stakeholders of the organization and take them through an attack. Take them step by step. What will you do when this attack happens? And what will be the steps and who communicates with who and who takes over this piece. So it involves high level individuals in the organization, but also has technical components that need to be well addressed as part of it. So going through a tabletop exercise, not only is it helpful for the organization to know what they would do if it happens, but also really valuable for those who are in charge of security, the chief information security officers or the directors of security to say, hey, this could be a real problem. And we have real assets here to protect. And so,
I think there's also a myth though that this is only for big companies. And I would phone in driving into work and say, today we've just had the following disaster. Everybody meet in my office. I don't care what you're working on because you would have to do this in a real situation. Here's the situation. I want to know how we're going to handle it. And we actually walked through it. Now,
yeah,
because I could do that anytime, first of all, we found out we had some holes. It's one thing, we had backups. Sometimes restore was a little bit of a problem, but you found out all those things. And I think you had some fun. And so
yeah,
when we actually had a real disaster, I watched my team roll it out. Why? They'd done it 3 or 4
practice.
times.
Yeah. It's common practice now to go through that type of exercise. And I think the real value, obviously, there's a value from a technical team perspective, an IT team perspective, but the real value is for the folks outside of it, like the finance folks, the HR folks, to start understanding, oh, there is implications. There's company-wide implications to these cyber attacks now, because data, I think we're well past what we call digital transformation. I think we're in the digital age now. I think we've been talking about digital transformation for 5 years now. COVID helped accelerate this, but I think we are in the age now. Like digital assets are almost as important as physical assets now to organizations. In some cases, some organizations even more actually. Um, but protecting those assets and the repercussions of either leak or stolen or inaccessible assets it's still really, it reverberates across the organization. And it's not just an IT problem. It's not just a security problem. It's an overall organizational problem that we see. So I love that you would call and get everybody worked up. And I think that would be really exciting to do that. But one of the things that we hear from small organizations is, oh, I know I'm vulnerable. I know I have all these problems. There's no point you doing penetration test or us doing a tabletop exercise. So that apathy is real, right? And it's something that when we talk to organizations like that, it's if you know these problems, do the people who own your organization know these problems? Do they accept that risk? Are they willing to accept that risk at the level it is? And how do we communicate that up the chain?
Yeah. And it's sheer inertia with that. And yet,
Yeah.
so many times, as if you did 3 or 4 things, you reduce your attack surface. You make it harder to attack you. You make it less interesting to attack you, less profitable. We
Yeah.
started our conversation with that. Yeah. So,
Yeah. The speed. And I think one of the things that popped into my head as you're saying that is the speed of attack is highly important for the majority of attacks that we see. Obviously, there's those low and slow ones that sit within the organization and they gather information and they figure out how your POs are. I think in some cases, the attackers know your processes better than you do in your own organization because they sat there and they learned it better than you have. Um, but I think in some cases also we need to be aware that the majority of attacks are about speed, right? They're not going to spend days and days trying to get $500 out of you. They're going to move on to the next person. If you show, just like when you hang up on a spam call, they move on. They don't have time for the day-to-day
yeah.
folks.
But even if they are, and my friend Terry Cutler's always telling me like 280 days is the average time people are in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if they're taking $500, they're doing that to test your systems so that you'll trust them.
They see a human vulnerability that they're attacking rather than a technical vulnerability. One of the interesting pieces when we talk about, and there's a lot of talk about adversary AI specifically, and what will adversary AI really, how it will it impact organizations. I'm the opinion that obviously we're going to see more phishing emails, but I think that we're going to actually see more human imitation, right? The concept that that phishing is going to get more sophistication. I think an interesting note here is that we're going to use as much human capacity as we have to be aware of these attacks. I think they're going to get less kludgy. I think they're going to they're going to be less spelling mistakes. There's going to be more context to who you are and who you work for and all this open source information that they can gather now really quick by using AI as a tool or even the machine learning tools that attackers have developed. And I think while that's true, I think we're also going to have to take consideration that an effective attack imitates a human well. So
Mhm.
the odd spelling mistake, the odd flaw, the odd typo will make that more real. I know I make typos all the time.
Oh,
If somebody got a
funny
perfect
you
email
should
from
mention
me,
this.
they wouldn't click on it, right?
Yeah, we did a story and it was about the sophistication of phishing attacks. And this analyst detailed everything that happened in that attack. It was astonishing how good they were at getting you to trust them. The web pages looked like they were from Google. There were calls made. A week would go by. They would make another update call. This was carefully planned out and they were going to pull this off. What gave them away was that the precision of how they dealt with one thing. And that's what made this guy suspicious. It was too mechanical and it just didn't fit. And so you say, yeah, you can use AI for these things, but there'll probably be a program that says, and now mess it up a little like a human.
More like Evo and less like what Evo should be. Because I think from a defense perspective, that's one thing that I always talk about, whether it's with my family or with large organizations, be aware of your emotions and be really aware of your emotions when you get something. Nothing is so urgent that needs to be dealt with right away. Nothing is so urgent that nothing's so amazing that you've won the free iPhone. That doesn't happen that often. And you could probably give it some time there. And nothing's so terrible that needs to be reacted on right away, right?
Yeah, there's just that sort of one place where procrastinators are better than anybody else. I'll think about that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I like to say,
So
Brad, leaders of tomorrow.
so if you wanna take action, do it on building your defenses and building
Yeah.
your recovery. If
Yeah.
you on the stuff that they offer you, you could procrastinate and
Yeah,
say,
more
"I'll
than
I'll get
likely
to that
there's
tomorrow."
time there. And then that's, I think, especially when we talk about the general population, when I talk to my parents, or when I talk to my family, that's one of the areas where I say, hey, take your time, find another channel, check the reality of it. We see a lot of these voice attacks, right? These phishing attacks that are vicious, that they really are playing with people's emotions, and making them feel like their loved one is in trouble or something's happening,
Yep.
they need to react. And they sound exactly like them. One of the key areas where I would always make recommendations: have a family password. Have a family password that you use, or a family word to protect that. Because I think these sort of attacks are just going to be more prolific because we know we all have the vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
Give you
Not a bad thing in the finance area too.
No, absolutely. In the finance area, we're seeing attacks that are so real. Like I talked about following processes better than people can, right? There's a people process technology. The most recent templates get used, and more like, to the point that, again, the perfection almost limits them from being successful. But we're seeing, and definitely in that space, because where the money is, there's a lot of pieces there.
Just staying with the AI theme, because like I
Sure.
said, my podcasting license gets revoked if I don't talk about AI at least once in a podcast. But the idea, and I was glancing over your CISO's survey that you did at the recent
Mhm.
conference. People are you're getting a sense that people are having a much more mature awareness of AI in security now?
It's really interesting because I think when we think about AI, and we talked about adversary AI, but there's also AI in the workplace, and not only protecting organizations from the adversary side, but also protecting organizations from making mistakes that could lead them to hand over information to the AI system that they shouldn't, or make that data accessible, right? The lifeblood of AI is data. Data is, like, as we talked about, could be the most important asset in today's economy. It means organizations have to have the right controls when implementing AI and AI policies within organizations. That's step one, right? Make sure that your organization, people in your organization, are using ChatGPT properly, or Copilot properly, or whatever third party, that that the controls are in place and the policies are in place. So you don't take that really valuable data asset, and put it out there and make it available to who knows what, right? Put it out on the internet, accessible to those who could use it for nefarious means. And the other part of this, and that we talk to organizations about, is the enterprise AI. The ultimate goal for a lot of organizations, and the only way they believe they can stay competitive in their own space, is by injecting AI into their business operations. If you don't talk about AI, if you don't cover AI, you're not relevant anymore. The decision makers, even outside of IT, in the business side, are saying, how can we put that now with AI sticker on everything we do? But doing this, as you can imagine, brings on a slew of potential issues. Let's think about first AI infrastructure, virtual machines, containers, be it serverless, be it machine learning, libraries. It could be the code, it could be the optimization of tools and drivers, GPUs, CPUs, all that needs to be supported. If you're doing this in house, you can imagine the number of vulnerabilities that will bring, be it from a design considerations, or be it from straight up code vulnerabilities, CVEs that could be exploited and all that. And that's just that piece. But if you build this system in house, how will you limit what it has access to? Will it have your CEO's information, and how much they get paid as part of it? Will it have information of all the paycheck within the organization? Will it have access to data that isn't correct data, but it could lead you in the wrong direction? So the vector of access to the right data is super important, especially when we talk about data loss prevention. The field of data loss prevention continues to grow. And then how will these data sets be trained, right? Will they be trained to behave in accordance with your policies? Do you have policies that will help this new system, which in a way, it's yet another user in your organization? Will it be able to behave in accordance with your policies and what you believe your policies should be? And then layer on top of all that, the models, right? The models, which AI models will be using, and do they fit within your security policy? So lots of challenges when you do this in-house. Really bringing technology and implementing AI in organizations, it has a lot of potential areas. And we do a lot of work with organizations who are there, who are doing this in-house, and they need to be confident that's the work they're doing. So we do assessments against it. We help with the controls. We obviously sell technology that can help with the controls against that data leakage and protection of that data, but also an overall strategy around AI and AI security is paramount before jumping into this. There's a lot of easy buttons for jumping into AI, but there is no easy button when it comes to protecting the AI environment.
My biggest fear, and I saw it in your CISO survey, was people, I think, I forget what the exact question, but it said, do you feel that AI is holding you back? Something like that. And there was quite a strong response there. And that if that's in the CISO community, it's going to be in the business community. My biggest fear is that we're going to do what we've done every time, and that is turn this into a them and us. They're saying no, we have to say yes. We've done
Yeah.
that with cloud. We did it with departmental computing. We never seem to learn the lesson of walking across the aisle and saying, we need to work on this together.
The challenge, I think the question was specifically around privacy, right? Is privacy holding back the use of AI within your organization? And the reality is, I feel that way about my privacy data, right? I don't want ChatGPT to everything about me. And organizations are pulling back from that and saying, let's like that. The question was specifically about using cybersecurity, so using AI as a detection and protection tool in the environment, and how privacy holds that back. I think the cybersecurity folks, we're our own enemy here. We know we want to do these really cool things, but we also know the privacy impacts of it. So we pull back and forth with it. I think that the reality is that AI will continue to be an enabler for business. I think it'll continue to be an enabler for, I think, some fantastic things in the future. But those vulnerabilities will also always be there, just like they were in cloud, just what they were in previous models that we've used. So I think being able to talk about it like this, being able to have conversations about cybersecurity and how it can be, like we said, an enabler earlier, it's still really important. I'm always positive about the future. I think we will get to a point where now cloud computing is a little easier. Security is definitely, the tool sets are there. The processes are there. We just need to get our hands dirty and secure the cloud the way we've talked about. And I hope that we can make even a quicker movement towards securing artificial intelligence and large language models in the enterprise. And
We'll
small
get
business.
there. It's a question of
Yeah.
how painful it will be. Yeah. Yeah. What are you telling your clients from the overall, from everything you've seen? What are you saying to them as you open this conversation about AI?
The first thing that we have to do is listen to the business. Listen to what the business needs to do and is going to do. Most of us who work in cybersecurity are part of an organization that's trying to grow, either protect patient data at a hospital or grow the shareholder value at another organization or deliver pizzas. I think the key area is listen to the business and what the business wants to do, and try to be an enabler, aware of risk, right? The risk is the big conversation that we want to have. And if we can have conversations about risk with the people who lead our organizations and say, what is actually acceptable and what is actually, what's going to make us highly competitive in the market? And does it make sense to put these controls in place? I know it sounds like big organizational enterprise architecture, security architecture conversation, but at a small company, you're doing that all in your head. You're moving forward with understanding the risk of the organization and what your owner, be it a small construction company or be it the Royal Bank of Canada, what is the risk that they're willing to take? So there's quite a breadth of conversation that you can
Yeah.
have, but it always comes down to business and business risk. It's not very exciting when it comes to the cybersecurity world. It's a really important part of the business because you're justifying your role as a security professional.
Yeah. I think it's a valid question that we should be asking as security professionals, not saying you can't do this. Say, how much risk are you willing to take? That's good advice.
So it simplifies, right? And then there are organizations where the conversation doesn't happen, or where the technical folks, which is the most people I talk to are the technical folks on the ground, they really don't have that direct connection to the leaders to have that conversation about risk. And that's a common gap right? We talk about rationalization a lot. So
That's one of the things I would like to talk about
yeah,
is
so
rationalization because it's
yeah,
a big issue.
yeah, it's absolutely. When we look at the Gartner reports, that's a huge area where organizations are. Gartner reports and IDC reports, really 77% of security executives want to reduce the number of solutions and services they use. And organizations have so many tools within the environment. What's a key area we're seeing that the people in the C suites are talking about consolidation. They're talking about rationalization and exploring things like enterprise agreements but we find that there's a real disconnect between the folks in the cybersecurity profession that are hands-on keyboard doing the day-to-day conversation and those who are making the platform decision. There's a real gap there. And it's what we do in terms of workshops and helping organizations is we actually sit down and go, now we really understand the technology you want to rip out and the technology you want to put in place. Can we help you actually understand what the impact is so you can have a great conversation with the people in charge to say, yes, we're going to move towards platformization, but here's the actual IT impact, the user impact, because user experience is one of the most important parts of modern cybersecurity. So will there be impacts to the user experience? Will there be impacts to today business if we go in this platformization direction? And what does that roadmap look like from a technical impact? While the architecture and the enterprise architecture and the security architecture side of the paperwork and how that's built from a high level is highly important, the people with their hands on the keyboard managing the day to day are a bit disconnected. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done from that broader conversation.
But and I think it's one of the things that we'll all admit in the cybersecurity industry is that the proliferation of tools is astonishing. And I sat in one boardroom and CFO turned to somebody and said, yeah, just give you another $250,000. Everything will be fine. And so there's a little bit of a cynicism from those who cut the checks for this, but there is a real understanding that the proliferation of tools makes it difficult to actually integrate and manage this. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. When I talk about cybersecurity, it's the only part of IT that has a real, true adapting and changing enemy. Availability
Hmm.
just has code and you fix code and you make it available, or designs that need to be fixed and honed in on and errors, but specifically having an attacker. And this is why our industry changes so much. And that's why when you go to the security conferences, the booths go on at RSA, the booths go on for days. And there's all kinds of neighborhoods of vendors because there is always new things to protect and always new attacks that we're trying to protect our organizations from. Platformization would be the end all. And you've been in it long enough, Jim, that you know that we contract and then we expand, contract, expand, right? So I think we're at the contracting piece. So we need to figure out, hey, I have too many vendors. It's causing me a lot of headaches for our organization. And even worse than just the time that it takes to manage multiple tools is the potential of missing something, the potential of missing an attack because you're busy focusing here when you should be focusing there. Platformization, the utopian world is that we can find that one vendor that'll help us with all these pieces. And that's been, I think we're getting better. I think we are getting to a size of the key vendors that we work with where they are closer to the platformization. There are risks to having multiple disparate systems. We still talk about defense in depth, but having multiple vendors in that defense in depth model has its merits, but also has its serious downsides, right? But there are great advances in the area of automation, the area of machine learning that'll make the day-to-day life of the operation, the ops folks easier when it comes to cybersecurity.
It certainly something that never goes away in this industry, that balance between not having one point of failure, one single area, or layers of defense, and where you get all this eventually shelfware or things that don't connect that are probably more of a risk because of
Yeah.
things falling through the cracks.
Well, you layer on top the fact that some systems need to stick around for 20, 30 years, right? Because they're the backbone of the operation. There's code there that's very old. You need to find the compensating controls to protect those systems because they're highly vulnerable or they could never be updated. So those challenges are still happening in organizations. Some very large organizations in Canada are still running code from the 80s and 90s that could be highly vulnerable. So we
Yeah.
see that as yet another challenge where we need to figure out what are the right controls that can be put around it.
I have to ask you one thing quickly. And
Sure.
that is when you sent me the CISO survey, I saw the things people were talking about the future. And one of them was quantum. And I are you getting a sense that people are actually talking about that now?
Yeah. Just this morning, somebody sent me, I think it was a CSO online article about research in China, where they've claimed to have broken a 22-bit RSA encryption.
Could have got
Uh,
you could have got that on cybersecurity today too. We did the story yesterday. It blew me
okay,
away.
perfect. I can rewind if you like. Um,
It's it's okay. People can get their news elsewhere occasionally, but
somebody send me a link. I don't.
but
Yeah,
but that
exactly.
story came so seeing this and that story coming up yesterday, and the third piece was it was a Canadian company that supplied the quantum computer
Right.
that made this possible.
The Q day conversation and the day where quantum cryptography will break what we do in cybersecurity. I think it's coming. I don't think it's today, but we are getting closer and closer to that conversation. And when we get there, hopefully what we're doing on the defense side and what we're doing from an encryption side with quantum will match that. And that's the expectation, is that we've been on an arms race with our attackers, and nation states have been on the cybersecurity arms race for many years. The hope is that we will be able to balance things. I know that there are nefarious organizations and nation states that are collecting encrypted data because they know in the future they'll be able to reverse it. So I know there's a lot of investment in the federal space. There's a lot of investment in the banking space, where most of our country is dependent on the funds that are there. So there's a lot of investment in that space to get ahead of what's happening on the other side of the world. I think the news from the last couple of days, I take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but it's still highly important for us to be aware of this and quantum cryptography and Q day and where it's coming, when it's coming, and how we're going to react to it as a profession.
And the last piece is as you get ready, and we're in Cybersecurity Month, you've had the big survey and that you've done last year in December. You'll be moving forward to, I presume, to another one in
Yep.
the coming year. You've got your C summit that you've done. What what's the final sort of insight that you would give to our audience in terms of how things are going and what they should be thinking about?
Yeah, no, I touched on this, but I'd love to touch on it again, which is organizations, you move, be it to a service, SaaS models, right? SaaS models are really popular now because they really take a lot of the work away. They take some of the risk away. But I think understanding whether you're running a small business or a large business, understanding what is the risk that you're running by putting your information in a different system, or what is the risk you're running by having people access these systems, or having anyone from anywhere in the world be able to access these systems. I think the key area to focus on is obviously think about identity. I think identity is an overlooked area for a lot of small organizations, right? We talk about, user and having the user experience be so important for cybersecurity. I know having multi-factor was something that only top admins had. Now it's become a common everyday piece. So I think being able to make secure systems highly available to folks is going to be important. So my closing thought for organizations is focus on the business, focus on the business risk, but also focus on how you can make the experience easier for your users, because your users will find a more vulnerable, insecure way of doing day-to-day business if you make it hard for them. So I think that user experience piece that I touched on, coupled with business risk and understanding where your systems are and who's accessing them, that's really at the end of the day zero trust from a philosophy perspective. Make sure that you know who's accessing what from where, and that only the right people are accessing the data.
This has been a fabulous discussion, and
And
I we struggle to keep up, but I think to have these types of conversations and
hopefully I
the
didn't go too far into the technical space.
I think we're fine. The important thing is that people need to have conversations, not necessarily PowerPoint presentations, but having conversations about these things. And hopefully this conversation we had might give a bit of a model for people to be able to talk about it. Keeping up is tough. And I'll give a shout out to CDW's Canada Tech Talks podcast with KJ Burke, my friend. There's lots of material as the surveys that come out, the things that come out. And the other thing I'll point out to other people is, and you may echo this, is we somehow got this idea of their vendors and their customers and they're in opposition. And I would advise people that there are roles like yours in many companies where people can reach out. You can always say no and not buy anything, but you can get some great knowledge from talking to people who are talking to all kinds of customers. Worthwhile thing to do. And I hope people will take you up on it. I hope they bug you.
Yeah, I think the passion hopefully comes through, right? Like we do have a passion for cybersecurity, and I will gladly stop on a Saturday and have a 2-hour conversation with somebody at cybersecurity, much to the chagrin of my family. Exactly. And it's the reality of the world we live in. But I also hope that, and that's something that I pass to my team at CDW, our security team, all very passionate about cybersecurity. And we do provide this assistance for organizations to have an initial conversation about cybersecurity with us free of charge. We are ready to have that initial conversation. Obviously, there's an ultimate goal to make money as an organization, but also there's a real need for us to have more conversations about cybersecurity, where we can protect the data assets, because I care about my data assets that are held by my health region, that my health region and my organization. I think I care about my data, and I hope that people will care about not only their data, but the data they're stewards of their organization's data too. So.
Some people have a timer. So I have a dog, and he knows when an hour has passed.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivo. I want to thank my guest, Ivo Wiens, Field CTO for CDW Canada. And if you've sat long enough in our audience in this conversation, I want to thank you for being a listener. And you had a lot of things you could have done on this weekend. You spent your time with us, and we appreciate it. I'll be back next week with more news stories. I'm your host, Jim Love. Thanks for listening.